Hello and welcome to Alden Caro's Poetry Podcast. I'm Alden Caro, poet, walker and author of Somerset in Verse, Ex-Mortar Levels in Poetry. This is a podcast for people who suspect, as I do, that the world is moving too quickly and that something quietly extraordinary waits for anyone willing to slow down, listen closely and pay proper attention to it. In every episode, I share two poems. The first is a guest poem from the wider world of verse, something that has stayed with me or troubled me or refused to let me go. The second is one of my own, drawn from the fells, the coast, the weather and the strange beauty of ordinary days. And for your chance to win a signed copy of Somerset in Verse, Ex-Mortar Levels in Poetry, I invite you to suggest a future guest poem by emailing me at aldencaro78@gmail.com. That's aldencaro78@gmail.com. The next guest poem will come from one of you. Today we're going underwater and staying there. This week's walk takes us into a swamp north of Glastonbury, onto an artificial island built from 1,000 tons of imported clay, where people lived for something like 2 centuries, while the ground beneath them sank and had to be rebuilt again and again. Then the water took it, and the water did something to it that I still find difficult to believe. We begin, though, in the middle of the Atlantic in 1912 with a poet looking at a different structure claimed by different water and reaching an entirely opposite conclusion. So pour something warm, settle in, the wind is up, the light is going, and there is poetry to be found. Before we go further, let me put this week's theme plainly, because everything in this episode is built on the gap between two kinds of drowning. The sea forgets what it swallows, but the marsh remembers everything. Hold on to that. Thomas Hardy has been on this show twice before, Beanie Cliff at episode 17 and the Darkling Thrush at episode 22, and he returns today with what I think is the coldest poem he ever wrote. A word about the man, for anyone meeting him properly for the first time. He was born in Dorset in June 1840, the eldest son of a stonemason, and trained as an architect before he wrote anything at all. That matters more than it sounds. Hardy spent years learning how buildings are put together, how loads are carried, how stone behaves, and it never left his writing. He is the most structurally minded poet in the language. He made his reputation as a novelist, and then, in his 50s, essentially stopped. The hostile reception given to Jude the Obscure in 1895 finished his appetite for fiction, and he spent the last 3 decades of his life writing poetry almost exclusively. He published his first collection at 58. He died in 1928 at 87. Now, the poem. On the 15th of April 1912, the Titanic went down in the North Atlantic with the loss of more than 1,500 lives. Hardy's manuscript is dated the 24th of April, 9 days later. He was 71 and he wrote it to order. It appeared in the souvenir programme of a fundraising matinee at the Royal Opera House in Covent Garden on the 14th of May, an event held in aid of the Titanic Disaster Fund. There's a small detail I love here. The stanza about the fishes, the one everybody quotes, was not in that programme. Hardy added it before the poem's first proper publication in the Fortnightly Review that June. It was collected in Satires of Circumstance in 1914. I want you to hold in your mind what that commission actually was. Hardy was asked to write something for an audience of the recently bereaved 4 weeks after the disaster, at a benefit performance for the families. and what he handed them contains almost no sympathy at all. The human loss is barely mentioned. One critic has noted that the bereaved could sit in Covent Garden and read about sea worms crawling over the mirrors that had once reflected their own dead. It's a staggering thing to have done. 2 things to listen for. The first is the phrase immanent will, Hardy's own term developed at length in his verse drama The Dynasts, for the blind unconscious force he believed drives everything without intention or malice. Not God, not fate exactly, just an indifferent machinery, working. The second is what happens to objects in the first 5 stanzas. Watch how each luxurious thing becomes unreadable. Here is Thomas Hardy's The Convergence of the Twain. In a solitude of the sea, deep from human vanity and the pride of life that planned her, stilly couches she. Steel chambers, late the pyres of her salamandrine fires, cold currents thrid and turn to rhythmic tidal lyres. Over the mirrors, meant to glass the opulent, the sea worm crawls, grotesque, slimed, dumb, indifferent. Jewels in joy, designed to ravish the sensuous mind, lie lightless, all their sparkles bleared and black and blind. Dim moon-eyed fishes near gaze at the gilded gear and query, what does this vainglorious down here? Well, while was fashioning this creature of cleaving wing, the immanent will that stirs and urges everything, prepared a sinister mate for her, so gaily great, a shape of ice for the time far and dissociate. And as the smart ship grew in stature, grace and hue, in shadowy silence distance grew the iceberg too. Alien they seemed to be, no mortal eye could see the intimate welding of their later history, or sign that they were bent by paths coincident on being anon twin halves of one august event, till the spinner of the years said now, and each one hears, and consummation comes and jars 2 hemispheres. I want to focus on the first half of the poem, because that's where our theme lives. Look at what the sea does to the objects. The mirrors were built to reflect wealthy people, and now a sea worm crawls over them, grotesque, slimed, dumb, indifferent. Note that word dumb. It means silent, but it also means the mirror can no longer say anything. It has stopped functioning as a mirror. Then the jewels, designed to ravish the sensuous mind, and now lightless, all their sparkles bleared and black and blind. Blind. A jewel's entire purpose is to handle light, and this one can't. And then the fishes, who deliver the poem's real verdict. They gaze at the gilded gear and ask, what does this vainglorious down here? They aren't mourning, they aren't even impressed. They simply can't read it. Every object down there was manufactured to say something. I am wealthy, I am modern, I am unsinkable. And the sea has stripped the message off all of it, while leaving the object exactly where it lies. That's the distinction I want to draw, and I think it's sharper than the usual reading of this poem. The sea has not destroyed the Titanic. Hardy is quite clear that it's all still there, the chambers, the mirrors, the jewels, the gilded gear. What the sea has taken isn't the matter, it's the meaning. Nothing down there can be read anymore by fish or by anybody else. There's one more thing worth saying, and it's uncomfortable. Hardy's poem is magnificent, and it's also, morally, a bit of a horror. Because to make his point, He has had to remove 1,500 people from the wreck entirely. There are no bodies in this poem. There's no grief. The steerage passengers who drowned at 4 times the rate of the first-class ones don't appear. In order to write about vanity, Hardy quietly emptied the ship of everyone who wasn't vain. I don't say that to diminish the poem. I say it because I think it's the exact thing the ground I am about to take you to refuses to do. Now the introduction to my host poem, Glastonbury Lake Village. About 2 miles north of Glastonbury, in the flat wet ground between the town and the village of Godney, there is a field that looks like nothing at all. Now I need to make a correction that needs your attention. In the Somerset teaser segments of episodes 37 and 39, I described this site as a Bronze Age village built on a floating island of clay in a marsh. That's wrong. Glastonbury Lake Village is actually Iron Age, first occupied around 190 to 160 BC. The error was mine and it went out in 2 scripts. Underneath that is the best preserved prehistoric village ever found in the United Kingdom. Let me be precise about what was built there, because the engineering is remarkable. This was not a village on a lake, whatever the name suggests. It was built at the edge of a swamp of reed, sage, open water and wet woodland, and to make the ground solid enough to live on, the builders imported over 1,000 tons of clay. On top of the brushwood logs, rushes and peat foundation, they laid roughly 90 separate clay mounds. The site covers about 2 acres, and about 2/3 of those mounds show signs of occupation. The whole thing was ringed by a timber palisade, largely of alder. Interestingly, the current view is that the palisade was there to hold the clay in, rather than to keep anybody out. The houses were round, built of hazel and willow woven into wattle, daubed and roofed with reed. Some had central hearths of baked clay. Others, and this is the detail the poem takes, had hearths built from slabs of lias, the local limestone. Stone paths and timber walkways ran between them. And here's the thing that makes this place, for me, one of the most moving sights in England. It wouldn't stay up. The clay mounds, loaded with heavy stone hearths, pressed down into the waterlogged peat and sank. So the inhabitants laid a fresh floor on top, and it sank again. And they laid another. In one mound, excavators found 10 superimposed clay floors, one on top of the other. In warm hearth position, they found 13 successive hearths. Radiocarbon work, published by Historic England in recent years, puts the first occupation at somewhere around 190 to 160 BC, and the last building work at around 75 to 45 BC. Somewhere between 1 and 2 centuries of people relaying the same floor because the ground wouldn't hold it. Then the water table rose, the mere claimed it. Silt sealed over, and everyone forgot it was there for roughly 2,000 years. In 1888, a young man named Arthur Bulleid, a medical student, son of the founder of the Glastonbury Antiquarian Society, read about the prehistoric lake dwellings that had been found in the Swiss Alps and became convinced that something similar must exist in the Somerset peat. He looked for 4 years. In 1892, he found a scatter of low mounds in a field near the Godney Road, and he was right. What came out of that ground shouldn't have survived at all. However, because the peat was waterlogged and airless, the wood hadn't rotted. Bulleid and his later co-director, Harold St. George Gray, recovered bowls, boxes, baskets, ladders, wheel hubs and spokes, mallets, a door, a dugout canoe, planks with mortise holes cut into them, and woven hurdles, the ordinary wooden furniture of daily life, which on virtually every other prehistoric site in Britain had simply vanished. They also found weaving combs, nearly 90 of them, more than any other site in the country has produced, and most of them cut from the antlers of red deer. Bulleid gave up his medical studies to do it, dug for 6 months of every year and catalogued the finds for the other 6, went back and qualified as a doctor, and then returned to finish the excavation. So here is my poem, Glastonbury Lake Village. The wetland basin below the Tor offers no vertical relief. An artificial island sits on compressed sphagnum peat, the best preserved historic village in the kingdom, built from 1,000 tons of imported yellow clay and contained by a timber palisade driven into alluvial silt. Inside the perimeter, 90 clay mounds crowd edge to edge, a severe internal compression of woven hazel roundhouses where movement is channeled over narrow timber trackways. Heavy central hearths, built from blocks of lightless limestone, press the structural foundations into the waterlogged bog. It was not a stable footing, but a decadal cycle of subsidence requiring fresh brushwood and clay to reset the sinking surface. A medical student, Arthur Bulleid, opened the ground in 1892, chasing reports of Swiss lake margins, and read the human map. 10 superimposed floors stacked in the anaerobic dark, red deer antlers sawn into heavy weaving combs, all sealed intact beneath the rise of the water table. When the Mere finally claimed the settlement, seasonal flooding deposited silt over the abandoned structures. Hydrostatic pressure flattens the hurdles in the peat. A temporary tension laid over time. The wood does not rot, held flat beneath the accumulating weight of the marsh. And now onto our discussion for this week, the Marsh method. Both of this week's poems end with a human structure underwater in the dark. Only one of them is still readable. Hardy's wreck is intact and illegible. The objects survive, the meaning is gone, the fish can't decode a thing. The lake village, on the other hand, is the reverse. The marsh didn't just keep the timber, it kept the information. Bulleid could count 10 floors and know immediately that the ground had been sinking for generations. He could pick up an antler comb and know what it was for. The poem uses an exact phrase for this. He read the human map. And I chose that word deliberately because a map isn't a relic. A map is a thing that still works. So here is the craft question I want to put to you, and it's one I think about constantly. When you put a detail into a poem, which kind are you making, a wreck or a map? Wreck detail is atmosphere. It's the sensory, evocative, lovely material that does its work instantly and then begins slowly to close. Golden light, the smell of wood smoke, a mood, a hush. There's nothing wrong with any of it. Hardy's jewels are wreck detail and they are gorgeous. But wreck detail depends entirely on the reader already sharing your reference. 10 years on, or 100 or 2,000, it sits there intact and increasingly opaque, and the fish swim past asking what it was for. Map detail is specific enough to be reconstructed from, whether that be a named person, a dated year, a count, a material, 10 floors, 1,000 tons, red deer antler, lias limestone, or the year 1892, none of that is beautiful in itself. You can't make anyone cry with the words alluvial silt. but it's load-bearing. It survives the loss of context because it carries its own context inside it. 3 practical tests if this is useful to you. First, could a stranger rebuild anything from this line? Not feel something, build something. Rec detail asks the reader to bring the feeling. Map detail hands them the material. Second, does it have a number, a name, or a material in it? This is crude, but it works. Numbers, proper names, and named substances are the 3 things that survive translation across centuries almost unaltered. 1,000 tons of clay means the same thing in every language and every era. A hushed golden evening doesn't. Third, and this is the one that matters most, am I keeping the people in? This is where I part company with Hardy, and it's why I wouldn't write his poem, magnificent as it is. He achieved his effect by removing 1,500 human beings from a wreck. The Lake Village survives as a map precisely because nobody removed anybody from it. Those 10 floors are not a geological sequence. They are 10 separate decisions by real people to stay put in a place that was actively sinking underneath them, and to fix it again rather than leave. The detail and the humanity arrive together, or not at all. I would rather write the marsh than the sea. The marsh keeps the people in. And so we come to the end of another walk together. We have stood over a wreck in the North Atlantic, where the mirrors have stopped reflecting and the jewels have gone blind, and the fish gaze at the gilded gear without the faintest idea what any of it was ever meant to say. And we have stood over a field north of Glastonbury, where nothing shows at all, and where 90 clay mounds, 10 stacked floors, 1,000 tons of imported clay, and 90 antler weaving combs lay in the airless dark for 2,000 years, and came out still legible, still telling a medical student in 1892 exactly what people had done there and how hard they had worked to stay. The sea forgets what it swallows. The marsh remembers everything. And that, as it happens, is where the book ends too. Somerset in verse, Ex Morta Levels in poetry, arrives in paperback on Amazon a week tomorrow, the 3rd of September. There are no pre-orders, you will simply be able to find it on Amazon on the day. Glastonbury Lake Village is the last poem in that collection, and it's where the whole 100-mile descent has been heading. From the wind-scoured gritstone of Dunkery Beacon, down through Cheddar's Caves and the roof of the Tor, to a floating island of clay in a marsh, holding its shape under the weight of the water. It's a book about pressure, what the ground has been carrying it, and for how long. Next week is launch week, and I will have more to say about it then. Before I go, one small thing, and I promise it will stay small, because this isn't that kind of show. If these walks are becoming part of your week, the best way not to lose them is to follow the podcast on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, or wherever you happen to be listening now. It's free, it's quiet, and it means the next episode finds its own way to you every Wednesday morning without you having to remember. If this show has given you something, following it is the simplest way to make sure it keeps doing so, and it helps other quiet souls out there searching for exactly this to find their way here too. And now to our competition. If there's a poem you would like featured in a future episode, a classic, something modern, or a personal favourite you have carried with you for years, please email me at oldencaro78@gmail.com. That's oldencaro78@gmail.com. Every suggestion is entered into the draw for a signed copy of Somerset in verse, Ex Morta Levels in poetry, which I will send to you by hand. The book will also be available to buy at Amazon from the 3rd of September. The next guest poem will come from one of you. One more layer laid down on top of the last, which is, I am told, how you build on ground that won't hold still. So thank you for listening, for slowing down with me, and for being the kind of person who looks at an empty field and wonders what is underneath it. Until next time, may you find poetry waiting for you in the everyday, and I shall speak to you again on Wednesday.